Hey everyone again, it's Remy from Random Street Medic. We're going to talk about some bleeding control today. It's going to be a quick video. I'm not going to do too much in terms of demonstration today. I just want to address some of the stuff that I've seen online, talking about things that people keep in their kits. First and foremost, let's talk about the myth of keeping tampons in your trauma gear. Tampons are good to keep with you for menstrual items, not so much for gunshot wounds and stabbings. That's a myth. They don't cause enough of a tamponade, which is an expansion of pressure to control bleeding. So if you have those in your kit, just use them for what their initial purpose is for, which is again for menstrual cycle and vaginal bleeding. Don't use them for anything else. Don't stuff them in a body cavity or in a wound anywhere, because it's going to cause complications later. So let's talk about controlling bleeding. So first and foremost, there's different techniques for controlling bleeding in different parts of the body. So the more distally away you are, the easier it is to control bleeding, because you have vascular pressures which get lower as you get further away from the heart. The closer you get to the heart, the harder it is to get bleeding controlled, especially once you hit like a junction, which is a shoulder or a hip. So what are the methods? Well, you have direct pressure. If you're using direct pressure, you're using 4x4s, 5x9s, you're using the big trauma pads sometimes, you can use a cravat. If the only thing you have is a shirt or a towel, what you want to do is you just put pressure on it, elevate it, and hold it. Now, let's talk about some of the little more advanced techniques for controlling bleeding. So let's say you have a limb injury. For a limb injury, you want to use a tourniquet. So I prefer using the cat. You want to make sure it's not a cheap knockoff. You want to make sure the expiration is not expired. You want to make sure that nothing in here is rotted or coming apart, that there's no cracks in any of the plastic. I tend to like keeping mine within the package. This is just a trainer. And what you want to do is you want to open it up. You want to put it on the limb. So if there's an injury somewhere down here, you want it about 2 to 3 inches above the injury site, and you want to keep cranking until the bleeding stops, or at least the bleeding is more manageable. Same thing with the leg, same thing with the lower limb injury. And say that the bleeding is not easily controlled. You can just add another tourniquet right above the last one. Let's talk torso injuries and chest injuries. So obviously you can't put a tourniquet on the chest, and you don't want to pack the chest. So what you do want is you want to grab either something that's plastic, that's non-porous, or you want to get a dedicated halo seal or some version of chest seal. They make a whole bunch of varieties of them. Some of them have expiration dates on them, some of them don't. Some of them have vents, some of them don't. I'm not going to get into the preference of them. Some people like the ones with the vents, some of them people like the ones without. What you want to do is, if there's a hole in the chest, and someone's experiencing difficulty breathing, or you see bubbling, or you can feel crepitus around the wound. And what I mean by crepitus is it feels like Rice Krispies, or actually it's emphysema, not just crepitus. It feels like Rice Krispies or crackling things around the wound. What you want to do is you want to take one of these, you want to open it up, you're going to let them exhale, which is going to cause the chest wall to collapse. You're going to slap that on so that when they take their next breath in, it's going to reinflate the lung. But it's also going to keep air from rushing into the chest and putting pressure on that lung. Because over time what that does is it collapses the lung, it makes it really hard to breathe, and also shifts. There's the space right here called the mediastinum, and it contains the heart. So what it does is it shifts that over, and on top of them needing surgery because of the initial wound to the chest, they're going to need surgery to correct this, and this is a more immediate. This becomes a much more life-threatening condition than the initial wound itself. So you want to get one of these on as quickly as possible. So same deal with the abdomen. If you lack this, you can use plastic wrap. You don't want to stuff, again, you don't want to stuff gauze in here. You want pressure, and you want plastic wrap or some kind of occlusive dressing to put over the abdomen to assist in stopping bleeding. One of the things that you don't want to put in the chest, definitely don't want to put in the chest, is you don't want to put any kind of hemostatic gauze. That's, again, goes back to not packing wounds up here. Don't put any hemostatic gauze up there, and definitely don't use any hemostatic powder. hemostatic powder kind of fell out of favor years ago. Besides it causes chemical burns, it can also cause pulmonary embolism and a bunch of other things, so don't use that, especially not on the chest. And just as a last point, so what about junctional areas? Junctional areas are really hard to control because it's in the place that you can't easily get a tourniquet onto, and it's a place that a chest seal doesn't make sense to use. What you want to do is you want to put as much pressure up here as possible, and when I say junctional, it's usually somewhere in the shoulder girdle or the pelvic girdle, right in the hip. So what I tend to do sometimes, if someone's got a really bad injury there, such as a gunshot wound or a stabbing, is I put my knee on it, which helps put pressure, and then take a 1-inch gauze roll, or up here, you can use hemostatic. I wouldn't use a hemostatic gauze in the neck. Some people do, some people don't. There's some risk reward here, but it really has to do with causing clots to go up into the brain. So it just depends on where the wounds are. There's a special consideration for the neck as well because you have airway. So you're going to want to take a 1-inch gauze, you're going to open it up, and in the wound, you're just going to start pushing it in there. And you're going to keep going until either you run out of gauze or you run out of space. Preferably, you want to run out of space before you run out of gauze. If you run out of gauze, open up another one and just keep going until you can't stuff any more in there. And it's the same thing in the pelvic area. You can do wound packing as well in distal extremities. But your best bet for a junctional wound is to just take gauze and you just start stuffing it in there. And what that does is it causes something called tamponading. And what tamponading is a pressure that builds up because of the gauze, and it's basically like holding a hand or a finger on there. And then you want to cover it with a 4x4 or a 5x9 dressing, and you want to apply manual pressure. And you want that manual pressure to be tight. Just as a basic first aid that we've gone over in the past, don't take dressings off, always add on, and don't do anything that's outside your skill level, and don't use equipment that you haven't used before. If you haven't used a cat tourniquet, the time to learn is not when you need to apply it. If you haven't used a SWAT tourniquet or any of the other versions of it, you want to put your hands on it now while you're training and not out in the field when you need to use it. So once again, this is Remy. We just talked about bleeding control, and I'm out with Random Street Medic. If you've got any questions, leave them down in the comments.